Uh, yeah, Alex, thanks for the invitation. What's it called? This is called like Brian 2020 or something like that, right? This session, it's kind of uh, what's on my mind right now. And so the talk I've been sort of putting together from the past few months is just kind of called like, okay, now what? And because this is sort of like, we all sort of made it through the pandemic and, we have jobs and this kind of stuff, but like, what do we want to think about and what's real and what's not real and all that kind of thing. Um, I, let's see here. Let me click on, sorry, I got focused in the wrong window. There we go. Um, this whole thing, like you've probably seen a lot of comics like this, right? Where it's like digital transformation is years away. I don't see our company having to change anytime soon. And then obviously COVID kind of changes all of that sort of stuff. My role at VMware, I mean, like the rest of you, I now live in my basement, right? Like I my bed is 3 levels above me, and I on my way down to the basement in the morning, I stop by and make coffee, and then I come down here. I've got a bathroom down here. I'm kind of like down here in the basement for most every day, talking on Zoom or whatever, and then I go back upstairs and go to bed. Like that's my life now. And so I feel like within this pandemic, like I don't want to talk too much about that, but I just want to sort of see like what I've been seeing, because at VMware, I used to talk to a bunch of customers like by flying around. Like I would be like when we were in Athens and all through Europe, and I'm going to Europe a couple, I don't know, like every 2 or 3 months, and just meeting with lots of customers. And now the pandemic began, I'm meeting with even more customers, because every single customer I meet with now, it only takes an hour, right? Because it's all via Zoom. There's no flying there and that sort of thing. So I thought I met with a lot of customers before, just kind of talking about EUC strategy and what they're doing and that sort of thing. And I feel like now I'm meeting even more customers than I used to. And there's definitely been a change in tone in the past 9 months or so, right? When like meeting with different customers, like the first customers when the pandemic first began, kind of March and April of this year. Gosh, it's still 2020. Can't believe it. In in the early days when this sort of pandemic began, it was just like tons of VDI, right? Like everyone that had VDI already was sort of just extending it. It was lots of people like with VPNs that they had set up. It was just basically like what we already had, like everything that you already had built that was working. Everyone just like extended that out with the idea of like sort of just make it work, right? We didn't really pay much attention to security or logistics or anything like that. It was just flat out make it work and get the users out of the building as fast as you can. And it's interesting because I think like the takeaways from this, we definitely learned that we can work faster than we thought. I mean, I feel like with this pandemic, it was the kind of thing that if your boss came to you and said, hey, we've got to put all of our users who can work remotely have to work remotely, like everybody in the whole company, let's make a project for that. How long would that take? And I think for a lot of people, they'd be like, okay, well, give me 9 months and we have to do the planning and testing and all this kind of stuff. Obviously, in this case, we did all that in like 2 days, which means that we just were like very, very quick without all the details that we would like to have, but we made it work. And so I think that was actually a very like big eye-opening moment for IT, is the fact that maybe we don't have to be as slow and like anal as everything that we always thought we had to do, over all these years. Obviously, like everybody, we're also figuring out like, do we still need an office? But what's funny about this though is I honestly think the beginning of the pandemic, this is the first global like IT ops sort of proof of concept. I'm talking about IT ops. Different people call this different things, right? This is in the comparison to like DevOps. Like, with DevOps and agile software, instead of writing software that you release once per year, you just kind of iterate consistently, right? And everyone talks about like Salesforce and Gmail and these kinds of things. It's just like lots of little changes every few weeks, small, just like continuous improvement of making it better. And when people talk about IT ops or whatever phrase they use to describe that, right? Like running your IT shop, more like a DevOps sort of environment where it's just a lots of little improvements. That's so different than what we used to do within IT. Like I would do an SCCM project and it was like a 2-year project, right? To like design it, implement it, make it perfect. And what we saw with this pandemic was everyone was now doing this like kind of IT ops, like continuous iteration, right? Like they implemented everything they were doing very quickly, just get out of the office, emergency, and then make it like a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better, and just kind of repeat that. And it actually kind of ended up working out, right? Because I feel like, you know, when our bosses came to us and said, hey, we have to get all of our users out of the office, it's like, it's going to be chaos. And that first day, probably only like half the people got connected. But then the next day, another 20% got connected. The next day, another 20%. By the end of the week, you had 90%. By the end of the next week, you had 98%. And by like 3 weeks, you were pretty good. It's just such a different way of doing IT. And I just think about like how much that is sticking with us, right? Like how much of this is sort of changing the way that we do IT in general, and like what we need to know about sort of ahead of time. So that was like sort of that whole first phase. The second phase for us was in the summertime, right? Like May, June, July, getting into about now, like sort of end of 2020. The second phase is really about operationalization. This is a Ron Oglesby word, right? Like he loves talking about this, like how taking all these random things we had figured out and just like starting to make them more, just like make processes and procedures, and like if this is going to be the way that we work, how do we formalize that? And the other thing in the second phase, I think, is securing what we hastily built. That was a crazy thing with the pandemic to me. Like it truly was like in the Maslow's pyramid, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It really was everyone just like get out of the building as fast as you can. And then after the fact, go back and be like, oh, by the way, we should probably like secure that stuff. Because security, I mean, look at this from Z-Day, like working from home causes a surge in security breaches with staff oblivious to best practices. You know, it was truly people got out of the office first and they worried about security second. People just were not thinking about security as a priority as we're getting out of office. But now that we've got there and like things have calmed down a little bit, now we're going back to secure what we sort of like hastily built. And then of course, I think people are just, generally speaking, we are growing what's working, right? There's a lot of stuff that our users are doing remotely and the way that our users are operating. And we're just picking the things that work, and we're doing more and more of that. I hope I don't get to a point where I want Kahlua at my coffee every morning. So my gosh, 6:45 a.m. Thanks for watching, guys. So this third phase of the pandemic, I think this is like what we're transitioning right now, right? From like second phase to third phase, and oh my gosh, I'm just seeing this. I look like Donatello from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. This is the third phase. I feel like is just right now where we're just preparing for the new steady state. Like we just know that this era we're in now, our users kind of working all over the place, and offices not being to full capacity is probably going to be the way things are for a while. And so now we're just trying to figure out like what goes and what stays. You know, the stuff that's working, how do we codify that? How do we really make that like part of our DNA within our organization? And then we also think about like if distributed work is staying, what does that mean? Like what does that mean for us for real? Because the thing is, and by the way, so I'm trying to call this distributed work and not remote work, because I feel like the term like remote workers or remote work, it makes it sound like a second class person compared to like the non-remote, like, because think that's how work always was, right? Like you had the office. I'm a good example of this from VMware. I live in Seattle, right? Our main offices are in Palo Alto and Atlanta here in the US. And so when I go down to Palo Alto, which I try to minimize, right? Because like you don't want to go into like the head office. I mean, it's cool because when I go to Palo Alto, I see all the people and have all the water cooler conversations, and it's like a really, really great experience. But then when I'm home, I'm here in Seattle, and like while I'm drinking my Kahlua and coffee in my basement, like what are they planning? They're doing all sorts of stuff without me, right? And it's like, do I want to go on a play? It's tough. So I feel like the remote people have always been sort of like remote sort of second class people. If we're making like more people remote more of the time, I don't like the phrase calling them remote. Like I like the call it distributed work or like anywhere work or everywhere work or whatever it is. Like I don't want to make it like, oh, you are in the office versus you are remote. Obviously moving forward, you know, every survey, you all probably seen this, like moving forward, there's a lot of people who cannot wait to go back to the office and just want to go back to the office 5 days a week like it was before. They're probably people with like spouses and kids. There's people like me, not married, no kids, who have a house with a lot of room in it, right? Like I got pinball machines right here. I don't need to go in an office ever again in my life, like on a regular basis, maybe just occasionally. There's other people who might want to go to office a few days a week, but also recognize the flexibility. And so now we have to figure out, you know, it's not just that work is distributed. It's like some people are in the office, some are not. There's a mixture of all people everywhere. And like, what does that mean for us? So this to me is the big deals. Like this is what people are working on right now, is like figuring out what exactly is like our world going to look like? If I look back to like what we did in IT in this pandemic over the past few months, I mean, for sure, how we were successful, we grew on-prem VDI. So everyone that had VDI that was sort of like already running and had servers it was free. It was very easy to just like add more nodes to your VDI farm and then just, scale up your existing VDI environment. So I think anyone that had VDI, it made sense just to expand that VDI. The thing that was very surprising to me was that a lot of people bought new VDI also, especially if it was cloud-based, which I'm calling this cloud-based VDI now. I don't really call it DAS because I think the word DAS didn't really like catch on. It's funny, Gabe and I did this book, Desktop as a Service. Actually, this is in 2014, so this is now 6 years ago. This book was about DAS. Honestly, if you just like look at this book and do like a global find and replace and change out every reference to the word DAS with the reference to like cloud desktop or cloud VDI, I feel like this book is actually still relevant today. But my point is that, so people had VDI, grew it. People that didn't have, like we have one customer that did, I think, 38,000 seats of Horizon Cloud on Azure, where they had no Horizon before. Like they literally built that in like 2 weeks, 38,000 users, because of course they didn't have to build all the infrastructure. It's just getting their image basically set and kind of setting up entitlements and getting users connected. So I was surprised that even people that did no VDI in the past were actually going to VDI, albeit a cloud-based VDI, during sort of this pandemic. So that's really a surprise to me, this greenfield. Part of when I look back to like how we did it, like during the pandemic and how people performed this past summer, I saw a lot of people who were doing the SASE solutions, right? So this is something that, we launched our VMware SASE, however we want to pronounce that, like 6 months ago. Citrix is tweeting about this or blogging about this now. So Citrix is entering this market. This is a thing, if you haven't seen, it's going to be a big thing, which is, it's basically like in this drawing I made, this is sort of to show like a representative examples where we as VMware run a bunch of access points. So we have 2,200 access points. There's over 100 locations around the world with 2,200 actual access points that are our unified access gateways, SD-WAN, all that sort of stuff. So that users out in the world, it's basically like a VPN or VPN-less, secure, software-defined WAN as a service that people can use to get into their VDI environments and have good performance and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of like cloud-based, modern, very new stuff. And the SASE stuff, people who use it love it, but it's like it's just getting back to their VDI desktops, right? Like it's not changing their game that much. It's just like changing the way that they actually like deliver the desktop to the employees. So looking back on these things over the past 9 months or so of the pandemic, if I just kind of reflect back on like the takeaways, extending VDI to the home and remote workers, that like really actually works. Like that, I mean, obviously we've seen it. We've seen new to VDI, we've seen extensions of VDI. That 100% is actually like a very legit technology and works well sort of in this pandemic situation. The question is whether this is like truly transformational. And now, if it's not transformational, that's fine. It's sometimes we don't want to transform and reinvent everything from scratch, right? Sometimes it's just like, I don't care about transforming the world. I just got all my goddamn users that I have to get out and they have to start working from kind of wherever they are. So if it's not transformational, that's fine. If your users are up and running and happy and everything's coming along, like that's totally cool. But a lot of folks I talked to this year will say, hey, we were trying to do like a digital workspace or a desktop 2.0 or a future workspace or future desktop. Like people were talking about trying to do some future desktop stuff in 2020 anyway. Obviously, COVID turned 2020 into a shit show, but they were like, well, now that we got everything in control, let's go back to this like future workspace that we were working on, especially since COVID has like accelerated it, right? So now it's not some of our users are going to work from anywhere. Now it's like all of our users are working from anywhere. So so people are circling back to look at their plans and like what their like, digital transformation plans are. But I would argue that, VDI is not that transformational. It's the same. I mean, when you have a VDI desktop, it's the same desktop. It's the same applications. It's the same instance of Windows and all that sort of stuff. Frankly, it's the same argument that we made back in the day. VDI is just a form factor. right? In this book, The VDI Delusion, which is now 8 years old, our core premise of this book was that VDI is just a form factor. Like VDI is not fundamentally changing the way that your business operates. It's the same Windows desktop. You're just extending it out to your users kind of wherever they happen to be, which is totally fine. But it's just one use case. It's one form factor. It makes sense where it makes sense, but this is not the big sort of digital transformation that everyone was kind of looking for. So if it's not VDI, then people ask, well, what is it? And the way I've been drawing this, and I've been using this drawing for a few months, so some of you might have seen this a little bit. This is sort of a representation of this that I created myself, where I look at if you want to look at like modern workforce, modern digital workspace, whatever you want to call it. I feel like there's a lot of pillars to it. Like if we look at traditional IT, right? Like from the EUC standpoint, from the modern workspace standpoint, our traditional approach to this has been about device management. It's been about app delivery. It's been about user management, and it's been about files and data. When I say device management, I'm talking about SCCM managing your thin clients, Mac, iOS, Android, all that kind of stuff. When I'm talking about app delivery, I'm talking about, again, local app installs, VDI, published apps, web apps, integration, SAM, all that sort of thing. So this is all the traditional, the device, the applications, the users, and their content. These are the traditional kind of like core 4 things that we focus on in end user computing. And this is what we have focused on for the past 20 years, 25 years, right? Now, so this is part of it. But I think also when you look at the complete modern workforce landscape, you have to look at sort of this consumer style IT. And this has been around obviously for the past 10 years or so. This is like what BYO, like whether it's bring your own computer, laptop, mobile device. This is things like the digital assistants, again, whether you're talking to them or like chat botting with them, the voice chat, all the AI bot, all that kind of stuff. This is sort of, this is things that consumers are familiar with. Like my mom understands this stuff, right? Even though she's 70. But this is sort of started to creep into the enterprise IT world in the past few years. And now, so we're sort of, within enterprise EUC looking at the traditional stuff as well as the consumer stuff. The other thing that's newer is bringing HR into this. And this is a big surprise. This is a really, really big surprise to me. Now, I've actually started, again, this, all the end user computing companies are starting to reach out to HR folks because we recognize that, HR is a big service organization within companies, much like IT is. And there's a lot of stuff we do, like HR is doing, your onboarding, your offboarding, digital employee badges. They're doing like maybe proximity monitoring, campus and office tools for like pandemic planning. All these HR has a lot of tools, especially within the pandemic time, where we really need to partner from an IT standpoint to make sure we're including what they're doing as part of our platform. So what I see is, again, like, it's not just traditional IT management, the consumer style stuff, we're adding HR. And then the final piece, I think we have to look at the operational tech. I presented actually at E2E 3 years ago. It's actually, I take it back, that was the IGEL conference, I think it was. No, I presented the IoT, it doesn't matter. I did present EUC and IoT at EUC 2-3 years ago. And this is something like the IoT stuff, right? So like IoT devices, like all the edge network stuff, even like consumer type devices like the thermostats and cameras and occupancy sensors and all this kind of stuff. This is something more that IT is having to work with now and people are trying to bring into their environments. So to me, like, these are the 4 pillars of end user computing today. And then across these 4 pillars, we have like our common services. Like, obviously you want visibility, monitoring, and control across all these aspects of your IT, right? You want intelligence and automation across all aspects of IT. You want global access policies and security policies and stuff across all aspects of this. And so this, to me, if I look at like what the modern sort of workforce technology landscape looks like, this is what it is. This is what it is today. Much more so than just that traditional IT where we've all focused in the past. This, by the way, I'm not trying to do a product pitch for Workspace ONE. This is what Workspace ONE does, though. Like, it is all of these things, not just, I think too many people focus on like the traditional like device management and app delivery. You're focusing really on UEM and like VDI, which are both very important, but I think those are just like table stakes today. I mean, UEM and VDI are becoming very quickly commodities, and then everything that companies like VMware and Citrix and Microsoft add on top of that is all the stuff sort of on top of that. But this is what modern sort of end-user computing really is all about. It's interesting if you tie it back to this Jacob Morgan book, which again, all of our friends at Citrix, at Microsoft, at VMware were all, went apeshit over this book when it was released 3 years ago. Jacob Morgan talks about how keeping employees happy, there's 3 elements that fall in that affect like how engaged an employee is at work, and certainly their technology, right? Like just what devices they have, what technology the organization provides, that's important, but that's only about a third of it. The physical environment, so now it's not like, oh, I'm here in my basement, but like traditionally my office, and where is my office, and what amenities do I have, and what do the windows, is it natural lighting, can I open windows, all that sort of thing. And then the last piece is cultural. And the cultural, I don't know where my little chart went. Oh, weird. My preview slides and my actual real slides aren't matching anymore. Huh. Well, whatever. Anyway, the cultural aspect of things is another third, right? So you've got technology, the physical environment, and the cultural environment that are all roughly making up like about 1/3 of sort of the overall employee's experience. But we in IT are only responsible for the technology, right? Like the physical and cultural stuff is like, that's other people within our organizations who do this. And what's also interesting is, especially on the physical side, like once the pandemic begins, if cultural and physical is like 70% of the employee experience, how do you get that? Like, how do you deliver a good cultural experience and a good physical experience to your users when everyone's just connecting via Zoom and GoToMeeting all day long and they're just working in their basements? And this is a question really that everyone is trying to solve. And the way that we sort of approach it is we say, well, let's just focus on these employee experiences, right? Like we talk about, oh, we've got Workspace ONE, our intelligent hub, and it's got consistent experience, it's got engaging experiences, it's got productive experiences, it's consistent across the board. And we show pictures like, here's the iOS version. You've got the one app to go to for all your pre-hire, onboarding type stuff. We've got, you've got your like your app catalog, your people search catalog, your content catalogs. You've got resources that are available to you. You've got like notifications and micro apps and like micro flows and that kind of stuff. You can engage with the help desk and HR help desk and things like that. Engage with your digital assistant. So these are all the kind of things we talk about, and then we talk about, hey, and this works on every platform. So whether you're iOS or Android or Windows or Mac or web, it's the same everywhere. Consumer simple, enterprise secure. This is the front door, the place to go for all the employees. So this is all well and good, and we've been talking about this for a while. There's an article that came out yesterday. I tweeted this, which like no one cared. I thought it'd be a bigger deal. Where this website Reworked, like reworked.co, by the way, is a media site that they do articles about like the future of work and all that kind of stuff. Pretty good site. I've got nothing to do with it, but it seems pretty good. But Sam Marshall on that site just yesterday did a piece called "The Myth of the Digital Workspace Hub," like how I just want one place for everything is something you hear. But how does that change anything really? Which is a really great point, because I sort of tweeted out that yesterday, the VMware Workspace ONE Intelligent Hub, I don't actually use that on a daily basis because, like my applications, my web pages I launch directly, the other apps are installed on my laptop. People search is like integrated into Outlook now. I'm already an employee, so I don't have to onboard. It was just, personally, I don't have to use it, even though I actually use Workspace ONE every single day. I'm going to the different websites and the different components, and I'm getting the single sign-on, and I'm getting, all my content delivered as I need it. I'm just not going through that actual front door. So I think that as organizations try to figure out, how they are delivering this new workspace experience to their users, it's a balance of creating these like new third-party apps that want to be the front door for the users, while also trying to provide as close to a native experience to our users as possible without getting in their way. This is why Dropbox was so popular, right? Because Dropbox like doesn't really have a UI. I mean, it does for like setting preferences and things like that, but really it's just like a folder, and that folder is like magically appears everywhere else that you have folders, right? Like it's integrated into the platform you're using. And I think that's what a lot of people want to do, is not get in the way of their users, just let the users do, what it is they want to do. And the companies that did that, they didn't have to, I call it like pandemic pivot. They, because they had this sort of already, they didn't have to go through that pivot, that panic motion of like, oh my gosh, how do I deal with all the users outside of the office? Which some organizations obviously had done that. We were pretty good. I'm sure a lot of your organizations were pretty good, but a lot of them had no idea where to start and like how to even begin to think about the future. And so that's like kind of last little bit I want to talk about is like, how do we think about the future? And it's funny because there's this other article I read, I think yesterday as well, CMS Wire. They talk about how it's called CIOs Reimagine the Workplace of the Not So Far Off Future. I'm like, oh, this is probably a great article, right? Because awesome, like what are CIOs thinking about of like the workplace of the not so far off future? This is like in the next year, like what do we need to do? And this article, the bullet point outlined, like where can business processes be improved for the hybrid workforce, being some users are in the office, some users are not. And this article actually gave 12 things. Like here are the 12 things that a CIO has to think about for how work works now. One, fix end-to-end employee onboarding. Okay, I love how that's just like a bullet. Like, oh yeah, all you gotta do is simple. Just go ahead and fix your end-to-end employee onboarding. Like, no shit, okay. Adopt more paperless processes, refactor existing work processes from the ground up. What? Who's doing this? Understand and accept that digital may not be natural for some individuals. Create agile principles and make sure there are clearly defined decision authorities, establish teams, and provide them with both autonomy and guidelines. This is all like, this is crazy to me. These are insane. Every one of these to me is like a 9-month major initiative. Like, holy shit, how do I even deal with this stuff at all? By the way, there's 12 of these things. That's only the first half. What else you have to do? Create effective digital platforms, make no code or low code a pillar for the digital workspace, provide tools and technology that enable and protect the remote workforce, give business leaders tools to improve their workflows, embrace remote work and ensure everyone can do a job effectively outside the office, and eliminate bias. But by the way, as if those first 11 are not hard enough already, while you're at it, go ahead and eliminate biases from your personal daily lives and then focus on the workplace. This is insane. My point is like, this is the guidance that is being given to folks on like how you think about the future. I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to kill myself if I was trying to deal with all this kind of stuff. How do we think about the future? Like just trying to simplify it a little bit. Again, it breaks down to the technology, the physical, and the cultural side of things. These are what we have to provide to our employees. The technology we've got pretty much nailed, but that physical and cultural, how do we deal with that? This is how I break it down. Because here's the thing: if you talk about VMware's culture, they're going to tell you like, oh my gosh, look at our kitchens. Look how awesome it is that we have like these great stocked pantries and we have kitchens and food catered in. Oh, look at the V-Fit gym. Look how awesome our gym is and all these great things we offer to employees. Look, we have chefs. We have chefs on site. By the way, don't get too excited about this like amazing looking meal. The sign down there on the slide says eggplant and polenta. Tarragon turnip puree, roasted tomato sugo. I don't know what any of those words mean, and I'm a native English speaker. So the point is, these things that we think about culture, like what's the culture of VMware? It's like, oh, free food, free gym, all this kind of stuff. That's when all your users are working from home, you realize that's not culture. Like those are amenities, right? That's nice for the office, but now that I'm at home, like how does that, like what are you gonna DoorDash me some food? I mean, like just pay me the extra $7 and I'll order it myself. Like I don't need that sort of from the company. The other problem we're kind of having as a company is that like, if you want to look at the real culture of an employee working in a company today, like is this is super trippy, by the way, with like me in the background, me right here. Hello. This is my desk like 2 levels up. So now my basement where I am right now is kind of where I did, like I said, my studio for doing webcasts and stuff. But my work is right up there. And the thing is, I was mentioning before, my daily routine is like I wake up, I stretch, I make coffee, I go to work. Who's our biggest competitor, VMware? Is it Citrix? Is it Microsoft? I don't know. It depends on who you ask, I guess. When a VMware employee quits VMware and goes to work at a competitor, that's a big deal, right? But if I quit my job tomorrow and got a job at like Microsoft, how would that change my life really? Right? It's not like I'm driving to Redmond and driving to Palo Alto and all this kind of stuff. It's like, oh, I still get up, I stretch, I make coffee, I sit at my desk and do Zoom all day, or do Teams all day, or do go to meeting all day. Like, who cares? So it's really interesting that the organizations are now having to figure out like, well, what is the actual culture of our company, and how do we trickle that down to our employees wherever they are? Because a lot of people say like, oh, look how fun we are, right? Like, oh, we have, which by the way, Zoom has Snapchat type. I'm saying things that I don't really understand, but I do like you can put rainbows and makeup on in Zoom. But it's kind of funny because a lot of our companies, like, we are trying to take our company culture that worked in our office and just push it down on our employees, right? So we have like, oh, you have meetings, and meetings are an hour long, and you meet here, you meet here, you meet here. Like, it's interesting. We're all working from home, but we're trying to emulate the office, even though no one really liked the office experience. And now we're all talking about Zoom fatigue. Like, a year ago, before the pandemic was a thing, we talked about meeting fatigue, and now it's Zoom fatigue. We haven't changed anything. We're just like, okay, I can do it from a sweatshirt now instead of like a button-up shirt. But other than that, it's the same kind of stuff. And to me, it's interesting because this reminds me of like, I think the reason that we are trying to emulate, that we're taking like the worst parts of the in-person office experience and bringing them together. Like, we got the worst of both worlds, because what was best about the office was not the actual sitting down meetings. It was like the hallway conversations and the lunch conversations, and just like walking by and someone pulling you into something you didn't know about, or overhearing something. Like, that was why the office was awesome. We don't have that with Zoom. We don't have that. We have this. But this is just like, so we took the meetings part of the office. Congratulations. But it reminds us we don't know any better. We're trying. But what can we do? Because here's an early TV camera. I know from my British friends that you all invented the television and the television camera, and so thank you for that. And I couldn't find any of the old BBC pictures where all stuff came from. But the point is, when TV cameras were first invented, well, when television was first invented, they had to make TVs, they had to make TV cameras, they had to like make the whole system. They got all it done. They didn't have any content. They had this great new medium, but like nothing to show. So you know what they did? They just went to like, remember the old timey radio shows where you had like all the actors being like, what danger lurks in the shadows, and you had like the guy with a piece of metal making thunderstorms and like door slam, all that stuff, right? It was these guys. You had these guys. For the first TV shows, they just pointed the camera at that and said like, I don't know, just watch the radio actors. And it's like, is this the right medium for like sitcoms? This was early TV, which, by the way, I'm kind of making fun of this for being like not accurate and like not interesting, but Jesus Christ, look at these dudes. That guy's standing on a bucket, like 5 guys there. Notice 3 of them have things in their mouths, like kazoos or whatever. Like, these people are hardcore. Like, there's no recording. This is all done live. Love it. But it's not TV. Like, it's just radio show with a camera now. I feel like that's what we were doing a lot in IT. This is what VDI is to me, right? VDI is like, oh, well, we need a better workspace. We need some other way, to collaborate, because now users are working all over the place. And it's like, well, I guess if we just do VDI, that seems fine, because I don't know. But this is what VDI is, right? It's the TV camera pointed at the radio actors. Now, I believe, here's all this bullshit I was building up for the past half hour on this. I believe we might be getting to the point where the modern workspace is finally replacing the Windows desktop. And if this sounds familiar to you, it's because it is. I actually presented this session. I presented a session called The Future of the Desktop. Presented at Bri Forum 2012. I proudly presented it at Pub Forum that year. I presented at both the US and the London Bri Forum this year. Man, Kahlua and coffee is pretty freaking awesome. I forgot it was in there. Pretty sweet. So these next few slides, I pulled my slides from 8 years ago. They're 4x3. Because this is going back, is a modern workplace finally ready to replace the Windows desktop? And the way I look at it is like, when you think about Windows desktop, like this is a Windows desktop, right? Again, these are the slides from 2012. Like, look at 4x3 ratio. We look at a Windows desktop and we say, like, well, here's what the desktop is, right? It's Windows. It's my desktop. It's a one thing that's a Windows desktop. But really, it's not just a one thing, because the Windows desktop, the Windows operating system, it is the hardware interface for my device, right? It's the software that runs and lets my applications interact with the hardware. It is the user interface on this device. It's my application runtime. It has all the frameworks and APIs, the applications can write to, and they can operate without having to have everything embedded into them. The Windows desktop is an app launcher. It allows me to see what applications I have available based on what's in the start menu, or like shortcuts, on the desktop or whatever. It is a provisioning target. Like, I installed Chrome onto Windows. I install Acrobat. I install the applications into Windows. It is my app integration framework. So Windows has like copy and paste integration, the drag and dropping, like OLE, all that sort of stuff. Shared printers, shared profiles. It's how my applications integrate with each other. Windows is a security container. Brian, log into the Windows desktop, and then everything I click, it has my context and my tokens. And then finally, the Windows desktop, it is a configuration container. My profile, my settings, my preferences, like how my comments and fonts and settings and document locations, all that sort of stuff I configure for Windows. And then all those settings sort of apply to all the applications that I use within Windows. So again, all these components are the Windows desktop. Like we think of Windows desktop as this one thing, but really the Windows desktop is like these 8 individual things. And this is not something that just applies to Windows. Every desktop, every OS, right? Whether it's Windows, whether it's Mac, whether it's Android, iOS. Again, these are my exact slides from 8 years ago. So that's why you've got 2012 versions of iOS and Android and everything. Stuff looked weird back then. I can't believe how antiquated, like seriously, everything looks from back only less than a decade ago. But the point is, all these desktops or like devices, they all have their own 8 things, right? So iOS has its own hardware interface, runtime, whatever. The problem, of course, is with VDI. If I use VDI to deliver a Windows desktop, I am overriding all the 8 things that the native desktops have with like the Microsoft Windows version of that, which is fine, but it may not be like the best hardware interface or UI, right? Like, I already have a UI which I like on my iPad. I don't need to put the Windows one sort of on top of it. So what I argued back in the day was, look, and the better desktop, the better workplace, workspace, whatever you want to call it, should actually respect the local characteristics of my device. If I have an Android phone, Android has a hardware interface, right? Android has a user interface. Android has an app launcher. Android has a way to integrate applications. And by the way, so does Mac. Now, the hardware interface, the UI, the app launcher, app integration is different on a Mac than it is on an Android, but they each have their own sort of versions of that. And all the platforms have their own sort of versions of that. And then on top of that, I've got certain things like the configuration container, how I configure things, how I provision things, how things are secured. All of those are actually like user context, like who the user is the user provisioned for this application, how's the user configured. These are tied to the user, and they apply to that user regardless of what device that user logs into. And then, of course, that last component is that application runtime, which that's just, the applications sort of are the applications. So what's interesting here is that, as I said, when you do VDI, you're taking the Windows way of all those 8 pieces of the workspace and overriding the local device, which is why I said I think there's something more in the future. Now, 10 years ago, we talked about this and we were like, well, is it an OS that's different than Windows? Is something replacing Windows? Is Windows dead? All that sort of thing. I don't think we understood back then what that really meant, because today I would argue that our future is very bright. Our future is it's rosy when it comes to end user computing, because now the digital workspace, the new Windows desktop, I think finally we're seeing a way that Windows can be sort of not our main workspace, but it's not the Workspace ONE Intelligent Hub, right? It's not Android. It's not some web splash top desktop or whatever. I think it's the applications you actually use. It's Teams. You know, what's replacing the Windows desktop? It's Slack. It's Zoom. Now we can add apps into Zoom, right? It's Slack, which can have apps added into it. It's Teams. Teams has the collaboration. It's it's Office. It's Outlook. It's all that stuff tied together. And when you look at like even the Teams collaboration, now they're talking about putting WVD applications into it. Like now there's Teams apps, there's web apps. If you click on a link and you don't have project installed, you can probably still double click that thing and then it's going to open up on WVD and then seamlessly project will open up. Like that is your new interface. And it's a very different interface. It's built for the characteristics of the device you have, and who you are in context and all that kind of stuff. So my point with all of this is that I do believe that we are now getting to the point where we can see a digital workspace that is not the Microsoft Windows desktop. Doesn't mean VDI is dead. There's obviously going to be plenty of opportunities where we need to deliver Windows applications to users who are not running Windows, and a VDI or remoting technology is great for that. But I think that what we were talking about a decade ago is actually finally happening. And to me, this is the most interesting thing sort of like in end user computing at this point. So that is my sort of random Brian 2020. That's probably a great overview of my year. We started out with the pandemic and looked at where we thought we were going. We looked at how things evolved. We debunked some stuff. We laughed at some things, and ultimately we went back into the trunk 10 years ago and pulled out content and think of what is old is new again.